Thank you very much. I'd just like to thank the Macquarie University and the team of people that have invited me here today to participate in sharing my personal concerns in regards to the Recognise process, the campaign, as well as the coming referendum. Now, I'm wearing a Vote No to Constitutional Change t-shirt. The R shirts are sponsored and paid for by the government. Hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money go into the Recognise voice. And here, us blackfellas on the ground floor around the country are not funded by the government, and we are not supported, and we are quite often gagged. So this opportunity to speak today is quite an honour. But in regards to the R, that it belongs on the R shirts, I'm not sure if people understand where the R comes from. But way back in the slavery days, it's a British law, recognised as a British law, recognised in the Black Laws Dictionary means to enter into recognisance. Now, back in the day when they had the African Americans, the Africans taken over to America, when they were given to their slave masters and they try to escape, they would actually incarcerate them, put a hot iron and brand them with R on their backs and sometimes even on their foreheads, and then they were recognised. Now, recognised is a binding legislation. It can never be undone. So every slave that was taken into slavery who went to court with their lawyers to undo the recognisance, it never was successful on one occasion because it's a binding law and can never be undone. So the concern that I have in regards to using the Recognise, that if we are embedded into the Australian Constitution without human rights attached, without cultural rights attached, it binds it in to never be undone later in the future. It cannot be adjusted. And the other concern is that if we are foreign to the system, which we are, we're not British subjects, by the way. The Australian Constitution applies only to British subjects, and there's also a law precedence in the 1800s that only British subjects can be subject to the law. So if we are bound into the Constitution, we are bypassing a treaty process. We are coming to jurisdiction. Now, Section 5126 was the idea of Section 5126 was targeted for our people in the 1967 referendum. Now, out of all the referendums that have existed in Australia, the 1967 referendum and the Recognise referendum are the only two referendums that they did not fund a no voice. They only funded the yes voice when actual legislation requires that the yes and the no voice be funded. And so far we see hundreds of millions of dollars get thrown at Recognise, and yet we are not funded. In actual fact, the final bill and the final wording for the constitutional amendments have not been released, yet hundreds of millions of dollars are convincing people to say yes on something that we don't know what the final wording is, and that is totally unacceptable. And it's also cheating, the Referendum Machineries Act. And also in 2015, last year, there was in the Referendum Machineries Act, they had, it was actually stated that the yes and no voice needed to be funded, and to the extent of pamphlets only. They actually went into the Senate and actually removed or repealed that part of the legislation to allow themselves to keep injecting more millions of dollars to the yes voice and no support to the no voice. And so these are the activities that the government do behind our back, constantly go into the Constitution and amend it and amend it. And every time they go in and amend the legislations, we find that our voice has been taken away Our rights to land have been dismantled. Our land acquisition has automatically slid across to the Australian government Commonwealth, when in actual fact at one stage, there was a relationship happening with the states to Aboriginal people, and then now all of a sudden we've got the Commonwealth getting their hands on all this land via deceptive pathways. And they go into the Aboriginal communities where they're freehold land and get Mod to sign on, to actually fix up their land or fix up their houses, and they've signed over the land acquisition to the Commonwealth. And these are the deceptive pathways that the legislations are doing for us. So for us to actually, in the state of current affairs that we are in the moment, to embed ourselves into the Constitution in the current state of affairs is a very, very unsafe thing for our people. Now also, we don't have equality in this country, and one of the concerns I have is cultural rights. We don't have a cultural rights legislation. We have copyright laws and there's intellectual property laws, and we are not entitled to the full benefit of copyright and intellectual property because the government refuses to acknowledge our communal rights. And so therefore, if I was to do a historic book on my grandmother and her cultural relations to country and Gomeroi, I can't receive intellectual property or copyright for that work because it is not recognised legislatively. Now, with all the proposals that recognise it coming forward and what they've put forward, they haven't even addressed the inequality with that. So they want to bind us in straight into the Constitution without addressing the inequality with intellectual property, and it's totally unacceptable. And cultural rights, this is our country. We never sold our lands, we never ceded our sovereignty, and we demand to have our cultural rights enshrined into this country, and that needs to be recognised as our cultural rights and our sovereign rights and our self-determination. And anything short of that is a cheat to our people. And with the polls that are going on around the country, the majority of our Aboriginal people are in support of the no voice. Most of our mob actually want a treaty. And even though we've had mentioned treaty and so forth, the first speaker had mentioned that the Australian Commonwealth doesn't actually have an ability to treaty properly. And the reason why the Australian Commonwealth doesn't have an ability to treaty properly, because they actually don't have an adequate sovereignty. Their constitution is a British Act of Parliament. It's part of British law. The preamble to the constitution exists in London. It doesn't exist in Australia. Yep. So you cannot amend something that is foreign to us, and so we've got the Sue versus Hill case, where the Queen has become a foreign power, yet she is still the constitutional head for the Australian Constitution Act. And that is, so what they're doing is they're borrowing her sovereignty to run laws across this country that belong in Britain. And in actual fact, the Queen never treated with our people, nor did the royal family treaty with our people. And it is, the Constitution is a British Act of Parliament. The Constitution only applies to British subjects. We are not British subjects, and if the Commonwealth wants to come into jurisdiction with our people, then you must do a sovereign treaty. That is all. Thank you.